Hello, everyone. It's Carina again from Break Fear, Find Freedom. And today we have a very special guest. But before we speak to our guest, I'd like to ask you a question. And something that I'm sure a lot of us have experienced in our lives is shame of our body or shame of being a sexual being and being a woman and being allowed to show that off without showing it off. So it doesn't mean that you have to go and parade in a bikini, but just to feel and be to be allowed to share your femininity, your sexuality as a person and as a woman without feeling shame. And I think that's what our topic is about. So do you feel shame when you think about sex, or when you think about being a woman as being in your own body and being proud of it? And why should we feel shame anyway? I mean, we are women, right? And again, it doesn't mean about parading around in a bikini. Like everyone knows, it's about being authentic within yourself. Okay, enough of that. You know where we're going with this, but we've got a beautiful guest today, Andrea Elliot, and she has this pegged down because this is where she was. But listen to her story. So sit back, earbuds or whatever it is, and let's enjoy this. Hello, Andrea. How are
Hello.
you today?
I'm very well. Thank you so much for having me as a guest on your wonderful show. Break Free, Find Freedom, I think is a profound message, and I'm honored to be here. Thank you, Carina.
Oh, thank you, Andrea, for being here. I'm honored that you're here because I think your message is something that people, I know women are, you grow, when you're a little girl, you're alive and you're full of magic. And then, with society and with patriarchism and whatever it is, let's not go into naming and shaming or whatever. You grow to shame your body and to shame and to feel ashamed about just being a woman, right? Tell us a bit about who Andrea is.
Oh, well, thank you. And I totally agree. I wrote a book called My Higher Kingdom, Men, May I Seduce You? Ladies, Please Join Me. First half of the book is me asking men to get into their hearts and learn how to feel again. And yes, I use very sassy, seductive language, and I have a very playful nature. But it really is about the heart. And what I say, as far as ladies, please join me, is the second half of the book is I am saying it was as difficult for me to overcome body and sexual shame as what I'm asking of the men to learn to feel again. So I then show a part of my very radical journey around transformation that occurred when I went through a divorce. And everything was perfect in the marriage, sex, everything, I was performing, the tasks that I was taught, and,
Yes.
it wasn't even, I was taught it, you learn from the man you're with. And I was under societal and religious indoctrinations of my body was for the man. It was never for me.
Yes. Yes.
And so I didn't know I was in this hypnotic trance until I went through a painful divorce and then began dating. And that's when I started to have to peel apart this deep conditioning. I had to break free from something that was literally wired to my core and
Yes.
was very painful. So I understand why women are disconnected from their bodies and don't even know, because I was one of those women.
Yes.
And so I walk through the second half of the book with different men I ended up in relationship with and what I learned through those relationships. And it sounds like a seductive novel when you look at it, because my life blew open as I dug deeper, and it led me into other regions and areas of the world. So I was under the conditioning where you only have sex with the man you know you're going to marry. And so I would go into the relationship like, okay, if we're going to get married, it would quickly have to get to, well, we're good, we're steady, I had to find that security that, well, in order for me to, and what I came to learn was that the men that started coming into my life started teaching me new things about my body. So each chapter is a different man. And I didn't have a history of all of these men prior to my marriage. Like, women, there are some females that played and had fun when they were young. They had more of a freedom in their body. I didn't. So I went through an exploration at 35 and onward with these different men. And so one chapter is Mr. BC, British Columbia. One chapter is the chief. He's a tall Native American, taught me a lot. Then it was, I was on a Mediterranean cruise. Never was I on that cruise thinking I was going to be getting off the boat at different places and making love to men. I never would have. It was actually painful for me to let go and allow these experiences. So having a man from different countries touch me. And then I ended up going back for my master's degree. I was digging so deeply into my psyche. I met someone at a workshop who said, you should get your master's. You really see the world in an interesting way. In order for people to hear you, you have to have an advanced degree. And I just I couldn't even believe what he was saying, but my insights started coming out real, fluidly. And he was a professor that was 80 years old and said, you see the world in ways that you must speak about. Well, I started going to international conferences, parapsychology, transpersonal psychology, and then I made love to a Brazilian. So another chapter is about the Brazilian, and so having men from different parts of the world, non-American, touching my body, Carina, ended up being an education that helped awaken me to things I didn't even know I liked or knew or felt sensual about, because no one had touched me that way. It was almost like, okay, it was like you could say 1, 2, 3, and it was over. And so I never had the space in between to realize that a woman's sexuality is about the space.
Mm.
It's in the space. And it was the compassionate men like the chief who he laid down and he laid in a direction looking up at my body in places I didn't look. And I was so uncomfortable with it. And he said, I just want to get to know this part of your body, to know what you like. And it was like, what are you doing? Because I didn't allow myself that exploration. So I didn't have permission to enjoy pleasure or pleasure myself or know my own pleasure until I went through this process that was over about a 6-7 year period. And then the reflection back of, oh my God, I have such a freedom. I have such a freedom. I want to share it with everyone. And although I've opened my doors to be a coach, most of my clientele have been men, but what I have learned is so valuable for women. I want to extend my understanding because just reading my book, I know will open gateways within women.
I love that. That's beautiful. And I just want to go back to actually having the courage, because you were in this relationship, you got married, you got divorced, right? Like traditional, you did all the right things, you got divorced. How did you? Yes, right things. Okay, let me rephrase that. Sorry, that sounded wrong. Right and wrong is relative right now. But what I'm saying, the right things according to society. Let me just add that, right?
That's what I meant.
Yes, so that's what I meant, sorry. And you were doing the right things because that's what you're supposed to do, like get married, go to school, get married, have children, whatever you do, right? what I'm saying is, how did you break that fear and that shame, going from being this traditionalist and doing all the right things according to society, to breaking that fear and breaking that shame and starting this journey? How did what shifted in your mind to be able to do that, or not?
It was one step. It was one step at a time. And when you walk through my book, that second half, ladies, please join me. When you read through, you'll see. I'm saying, like Mr. BC, a Canadian's approach was so different. My first one in the book is the Italian stallion. I lived back east. I grew up around a lot of very strong men.
Mm-hmm.
And their European roots were very much a part of their life, and domination was, the man is to dominate was a part of the upbringing I grew up in. So I didn't know differently. I did not actually know that I am much more of a domineering woman than I ever knew. I played submissive because that's what I was trained to be as a little girl. Be a good girl, make everyone feel good, and not know anything about my own needs.
Yes. And be quiet and sit in the corner, be quiet and don't say a word. Listen and don't be heard.
I was painfully shy, and I was exactly what you just said.
Yes, yes.
I was not to be heard, and I was a witness to everything. I just observed. My brother played baseball. It was all about my brother, and I love my brother. I'm not, there was no jealousy there. I didn't know anything different than the man is on a pedestal. And it was like religious teachings were brought home, and my father was God, the God that judges, the God that, that's what played out in my life. But I wouldn't have known differently because I thought everybody's life was that way. So here I am at 35 walking through. I wanted to be married forever. I loved my marriage. I loved my life. But I read a spiritual book that started to wake me up in my marriage that then destroyed my Western dream, because I was all cozy in that place, Carina, I'm sorry. I was so cozy in the ideology that I was fed that I didn't know a new world within me existed.
Yes.
So it was one step at a time, and each guy that in my mind first thought, I'm going to marry him. First thought, because it was indoctrination. Yeah.
Yes.
So
yes.
it was moving out of that trained thinking with each man. And when the chief, who came in shortly after the British Columbia, and he was so gentle, he was a big guy, but he's really gentle, and I'd not seen an approach like his. It forced me to get to know myself more, but it was really uncomfortable. I didn't go straight into like, oh, this is so great. I didn't know how to do that. It was tough. It was not anything quick, because the woman's body moves like the seasons. It's not summer then spring and a fully spring. There's a budding. There's all of this slow process, and that's what we are like as women, as females.
Yes.
And our sensuality, to me, is not about I have to have an orgasm. I feel like that gets projected on us from men. That happens for men, so they project that's what we want. But for us, it's all the things in between. It's all the communication, it's the slow touch, it's noticing what we like. It's all of that. Foreplay is so much more sensual and a turn on than it would ever be for a man. So it's overlooked and never displayed in our society. So I had to gather these pieces slowly and through every different man who came. I love.
Again, that's beautiful for you. But I'd like to go back again. And no, I'm sorry, I'm going back and forth. But you mentioned a spiritual book, and for me, I don't believe in coincidence. I mean, everyone knows that if you're following Breakthrough Find Freedom, it's all about synchronicities. And of course, you don't want to be stuck in a comfort zone. You think it's really great until something happens like your book and you realize, whoa, there's a much, much better world out there. And there's so much opportunity, so many exciting things to do. So tell me a bit about the book.
Well, here I was just living the happily married life, a stepdaughter, beautiful area I was living in Western Virginia near DC. And I read a book called The Autobiography of a Yogi. And Paramahansa Yogananda, who is a dear friend of my heart as a result, it was like a brick and someone banging it on my head that I wanted to change everything in my life. And I wanted to become just like this spiritual master. And yet I'd grown up in a faith that had never given me the kind of faith I felt from reading this book. And I was not an avid book reader yet. But that book made me, I changed my diet. I began to meditate in the morning. And then at night, synchronicities took off on a level that is, I've had to write 2 books because you would not even believe the things that it just blew up in my life. And in fact, I'd end up in other countries and I'd meet a stranger and they'd open their door and invite me in. And whose picture was on the wall? Paramahansa Yogananda's.
Yes. I always love those patterns and those synchronicities. It's amazing when you just open that door a little bit, it just blows open.
It does.
It's beautiful. So then what happened? So you read this book and now you're realizing, there's another world. This isn't so great after all, right?
Oh my God. It really messed up my life, and I wasn't someone that kind of sashayed or slowly meandered into my spiritual life. That book catapulted me and I ran. I didn't even jog. I ran and I didn't know that was running, but I gave up alcohol. I gave up all white flour, white sugar. Like, it changed my diet. I mean, it was just like I did all of these things and I applied everything Yogananda had in his book immediately. And I stuck to it like it was my life breath. And because I did that, I was working with a psychologist. I started digging into my childhood issues, all the programming, all the things I believed. I was going there twice, it was like once, it was like twice a month, and then it was once a week. And I was spending all my money on dissecting my psyche, crying, ridding myself from these. I just thought I could do it. I thought it was something you could do fast.
Yes, no. I think it is, but...
No, but because of the speed of change in my life, of the meditation, the energization exercises, the diet, I gave up alcohol. I just gave up everything. And I went inward. The change started happening fast. And then it was triggering my husband. And eventually led to my divorce, which was very painful because it was like, fix her and then everything's going to be okay. And I was so used to, it was all my fault. I was that belief, something's wrong with me, it's my fault, was something I was carrying. So of course went right into my relationship. And I was so subservient in my relationship that here I start questioning things. That wasn't the woman he married. I was the one that went along with everything.
Yes.
So then I was messing everything up. And then that triggered all of my childhood issues. So I was in this replication so fast that it was just like watching things blow up constantly and not being able to get out because I was still in it. It was very painful.
Yes.
And then I ended up just choosing to go back to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where I had grown up, to work on a rental that I had And I thought the space between me and my husband would be good because I was being blamed for everything, and I thought we'd be together forever. And he said, that's a good idea. But then he started walking through doing all these things behind my back, and he was ending things. And I'm thinking we're moving to a new level. So facing the house I thought I just was going to spend a month away from, I never ended up getting to return to it. It was like that whole life ended up, he moved forward and left me in the dark until, I mean, there's a lot of things in my book that actually end up happening. My first book that are, it's serendipity on steroids, and it's supernatural in so many ways. It was like I was walking between two worlds, and I couldn't make sense of any of it. It was painful and magical at the same time. Pain and magic, pain and magic. It was like this cauldron I was in, and I wasn't even telling anybody about the magical things that were happening because I was just gripped to I didn't want this life to change. I wanted to be with him forever. And so I was in that until then, the divorce was long and painful. And through the year of 2006, through the divorce, I was led into so many metaphysical people's lives, masters and psychics. And I ended up on a trip to Israel. I ended up going to India. I didn't even know where the money was coming. It would just land, and then I was off, and I was working 2 jobs to try to support myself. None of it made sense, but it was just one unbelievable experience after another that was changing me as a person, as a being, as a woman, as a live, living. It was like I was changing, and then that just led me to one journey after the next. I ended up traveling through the Andes with Incan elders, receiving the 9 rites of passage. And then I was off to Egypt, and I got initiated in all the temples. And I mean, these aren't ever things that some small little girl that grew up in a steel town of labor workers ever even knew existed inside of her. So I really blew open a world in me that catapulted me around the world to go deeper inside of me.
And that's great. And I mean, of course, now also in hindsight, that the minute you start making changes, everything starts changing around you, right? And of course, the people you're with, if they're not going to change with you, they're going to go like, what's going on? And you fall apart anyway. But what was that inner conflict that you had? Because I can just imagine being put through 2 worlds, like having magic and terror and all these emotions, and this being one. I'm in this real world, but am I in this world, or am I in the 5th dimension? Am I here? Where am I? How did you feel at that time with that conflict that must have been inside you, like I don't know, whirlwind, cauldron?
There were times that I was really, I didn't want to be alive anymore. There were times where I'd wake up and just, oh my God, I would be so depressed that I was alive. And I would have to make it through another, it was just like making it through. It was just, it was like, I just had to push through and to get to the next and to get to the next. And the magic would be so big, and then the downfall would be huge. It was just like this, it was like a leveling of 2 worlds that were extremely on opposite sides of the spectrum. So it would be an up and a down, an up and a down, an up and a down. To eventually the present moment where nothing else mattered, even the story I'm telling you, to all I have is here now.
Yes.
And that's such a safe place to land because everything else is just programs injected into our psyche through images and indoctrinations that isn't who we are, and has this grip to realities that are more equipped for an artificial intelligence than a live living human being.
Yes, yes, I love that. And when you realize that if you stay here, I mean, at this time, the only thing that matters right now is our conversation, right? And you realize that breaks down so much fear and so much anxiety, because you're not thinking about, oh no, what am I going to do if the X, Y, and Z doesn't work? Or, oh no, what did I do that I broke up with whoever, or I divorced, let's just say, I got divorced, now I'm a terrible person.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's very freeing to be able to understand that this is all that exists at this time. So I really love that. And how did you get to that understanding? Like, what actually clicked to say, hey, wow, this is reality?
Well, this is again is a compilation. I started getting Akashic record readings because there was so much dramatic change happening in my life. I actually was even having, I forgot what that's called when you bleed in places like at your wrists and your ankles. And I was having experiences that I couldn't understand. And eventually someone connected me with an Akashic record reader. And I would go into these and I would say, what thought pattern am I working on? What is it? Why am I, why did I pick that father? Why did I pick? And I was digging so far in, I was so deep, and I was pretty isolated because no one could understand. And my whole family exited my life. My marriage had me connected to a giant, giant family who was also my family. Just picture everyone you love, and the daughter, my stepdaughter, who was I adored and treated like my own daughter. Just picture everyone exiting.
Yes,
That's how
yes,
drastic it was. So
yes.
everyone I loved and everything, my job, the town I was living in, all of that, and I'm now in a vacant home, trying to deal with everything that's going on, and he not telling me we're going to get a divorce. So I'm going through all of this inner turmoil. And eventually, when I got to the Akashic record reading, after I've gone on a couple of these spiritual journeys to sacred lands, that I was never like, I'm going to sacred land because I'm going to. No, no.
No,
I would be on the plane looking at the brochure going, where am I going? And I'm like, I'm what? I didn't even know. In fact, I landed in the journey in Israel, and I was the 33rd person. And they were walking the footsteps of Christ. And I didn't even know that. I didn't sign up going, I'm going to. And we're getting our feet washed in frankincense, and we're sailing on the Sea of Galilee. And so to answer your question, when did some of those openings happen? When I was baptized as an adult in the sea, the River Jordan was one of the journeys on this trip to Israel. In the midst of a painful divorce, in the midst of work jobs, I somehow make it to Israel.
fine.
And this day that we get baptized, we all get into these long white robes, like we're going back in time and we're Essenes. And I knew nothing about these scenes. When I say this, I'm not speaking from a history that I'm reading out of a book. Okay, so memories of other lifetimes coming to me in moments of the parts of me that were always connected and always knew it. Those teachings started coming up in different moments. And this moment in the baptism, we were all to sit next to the River Jordan and meditate. And then when we felt inspired, one by one, we were to walk into the River Jordan. And this man who had written this book that I read, and I just wanted to meet the man that read the book. That's what led me on the journey that ended me in Israel. He didn't live there. I just ended up on a journey he was on. And it was more about his experiences that he was having that called me, that ended up becoming my own experiences through my own different ventures. So I'm in the river, and each person's walking into the River Jordan. Now I'm painfully shy. I don't ever wanted attention on me. I would turn completely red if anyone looked at me, more than one person especially. I would grip, I'd freeze. So I'm on a journey with people that are way more advanced than me at that time. I didn't know what I was doing. And so they would take their time and they'd walk in and he'd baptize them and he'd say yes, and you had to do a few things, and then you'd leave, and then someone else would rise and they'd walk in. So there's 33 of us there. I'm just sitting and meditating. And then suddenly a bolt in me, because of course I don't want to get up, but something bolts me up, and I start walking into the river. And I am down to just above my knees. That's how far I'm in. And I walk up to the guy we're supposed to say these things to. And all of a sudden, my arms shoot out straight, like I'm on a cross. And I'm holding them. They're stiff. I'm not somebody that ever wants attention. So do you think I want to be doing this? Never. It's not me doing it. It's something that's happening to me. And all of a sudden, my arms are out. My hair was really long at the time. People kept calling me Magdalene on that trip. And I just start bawling at the top of my lungs. And when I was young, I was always very empathetic, very, very, I could feel everything. And I didn't know things weren't my feelings. I could feel everybody's feelings, and most people can't feel their own, but I could feel them just being near them. And I didn't know that. They were just my feelings. And I started bawling so loud. It was like I was crying for a nation. I mean, loud. Something I would have never done in front of anybody. And I even thought while I was crying, oh my God, that pain is awful. Like, I felt for the pain that was moving out of me. It was like I felt like I was really, it felt like I was crying for a nation. It was that deep. And my head went back. I mean, I'm crying. My hands are out. And I feel this, all of a sudden, this electricity coming out the bottom of my feet and into my body. And my arms are stretched out, totally out. And one hand was right in front of the guy in the water. And I remember thinking, I'm going to electrocute him. Oh my God. And I couldn't move. And I kept thinking, oh, he's got to move away from my palm. He's going to get electrocuted. My head is thinking that. And this force is taking me over. Like, I could feel myself shaking. I can feel myself rising. But I'm no longer on the ground. But I'm not out of the water because I was over knee deep. I don't know if anyone could tell I was suspended. But like an electrical, like a bolt of electricity. I'm just shaking. And there was a point where my head went up, and all of a sudden the clouds parted, and it was such an overcast day, and the sun came out and just hit my head, and I felt this peace move through me, and my tears stopped, and I felt my feet come down. And then I went all the way down, and I picked up the water, and I began to say a blessing. Not one I'd learned in church. And I just went through and I blessed myself, and I went through this whole blessing. And then I laid back in this cold water and I floated. With people looking at me, that would have never. You could have held a gun to my head and you could have never got me to do that. That's how much I was taken over by a force greater than the being, the flesh that I'm in. And it was that day was the first day, to answer your question in a very long-winded way. I was present for the entire day. And I'd never had presence for that length of time ever in my life, where I felt the wind. I could smell everything. I had no more thoughts. I realized you don't need thoughts. Thoughts don't, thoughts aren't even who we are. They're actually a program being filtered in that interferes with the spirit that had entered me and reclaimed me. So that was the first.
Wow, that's a beautiful story, and I can relate to that because there's you hear of those stories all the time, and for me, I can relate to it because when I do my coaching, because I do an eclectic coaching, I use a lot of spirituality, and I'm sure you feel that as well. It's like it's like a force comes through you, and you and the you work and I work and I talk and things come to me, and it's like, where did they come from? Like your brain. So I can understand that, and it's so life changing. I mean, that must have just changed everything for you. I mean, how different was your life after that experience?
Oh my God. To think I had many more supernatural experiences after that, but that one, I knew I could not keep working where I was working. And I had gotten this new job, which I'd returned to the radio business that I had been in prior to when I was married, and I had changed my job when I moved to DC, but we had gotten back into it. But I knew that the industry was hypnotizing the masses, and that by working there, I could not remain because I would be a part of something that I knew was dark, wrong. I don't know what word you want to use, but I knew I had to quit my job.
Mm, mm,
And
mm.
crazy enough, what got me on that trip was I had won the company-wide innovation contest with one of those, had born psychic in that knowing, but I had clouded over it so much that catapult of energy definitely made a difference. But prior, what got me on that trip was winning the company-wide innovation contest, and I received $10,000. And when I called my girlfriend up to say, "Oh my God, I have enough money to pay my mortgage this month," because he closed all the bank accounts, and here I have this property, and I'm like managing month to month. And she said, "Oh no, don't you remember you said to the universe that you felt you needed to go to Israel, and if you were meant to go, the money needed to come. Show me the money." And I said, "Oh, come on, Lisa, no." And she said, "No, you got to go to Israel." And so she's the one that held me to that, because, boy, I would have much rather have put that in the bank and played along with what we're taught. Safety is money in the bank. Safety is not your spiritual life and being connected to your heart and your knowing. Safety was knowing there are numbers that are in a bank account, and that brings you security. So I was gripped to that reality while trying to pry myself loose at the same time. So coming back from that trip, I basically, boom, just marched right in. Said, I gave my notice, and I didn't even know what was next.
Yes, I love that. Again, the synchronicity. So I always say, be careful what you wish for, because it's just you have to, and it's been shown so many times also in my life that whatever you say comes about, right?
Yes.
Even if it's not today or tomorrow or next week, but it does come about, and it's life affirming and life changing, really. So yes, I love that story. So now we have to go back to your story. So now you've resigned your job. You had to have this experience. So you've resigned your job. What happened then? What did you do? Now you're in the perfect mode of trust, because that's where we always want. Well, I want to always be in the mode of trust trust and faith, and knowing that what I'm doing today or where I'm going will be guided, right? I mean, I know where I'm going to go, but I don't know the steps or whatever. So
You won't even believe.
tell me what happened then.
So, first of all, I started just saying things. I mean, from being deathly shy, I'm paralyzing shy. I walked into the big boss's office, who would come out of his office and people would just run. He was scary. I actually walked into his office. This is one of the things I did. And he's all intense and he's got this big giant office. It's gorgeous. And I said, he goes, yeah, what's going on? I go, I need to talk to you. And he's like, what? And I just walked right in. I sat in front of him. I said, does it bring you pleasure to intimidate everybody in here?
I love it.
What am I doing to do that? And he was rocking back on his chair back and forth like this because he had this like real intensity, and he stopped and he just looked at me. I said, everyone in here is afraid of you. I said, does that bring you power? Does that make you feel good? I literally just started asking, and he just looked on his face and was just like, and then that was all I needed to ask. And I said, that's all I wanted to know. And I got up and left. It wasn't an answer for me. It was a message for him. So the messenger in me that was very much alive when I was a kid, because I could see things before they happened. And then I was faulted for it later. And I learned to repress this clarity, this remote viewing, all these things that were natural. So, in fact, the man that owned all of the radio stations, the president, the last piece of winning that contest was I was to be flown to the American Music Awards and to be given this gift, and it happened again. I marched over to the president of the biggest radio group in the world, and I don't know what I'm going to say, but this was the beginning of this. Happens all the time now. I just say, and the Akashic record reader actually said, the biggest thing you're ever going to have to overcome in life is not worrying about how other people respond to what you say. Mm-hmm. It's almost like you deliver the message and you're done. Like that's your offering to the world at pivotal moments, and it's not your business what happens next. But I was taught everything was my fault, so immediately I'm gripped by, if they're unhappy, it's me.
Yes.
So here I am as a messenger having to deliver these, and so I walk up to him. And again, I'm somebody that would have been way too intimidated at a point in my life to talk. You'd say, talk to that stranger Joe, and I wouldn't, let alone this person. And I walked up to him and I said, and I remember it just comes once I get into position. I don't know, it's not from my mind. It's just like, I have there's a force that brings me over, and then I'm put there, and then it comes. And I said to him, do you realize what a positive influence you can have on the world by owning so many radio stations?
Right. Wow. Yes.
And he looked at me, he had this drink in his hand, and he looked at me, and he goes, and I remember him putting his drink back, and I could see his face through the bottom of the glass. And there I go. I turned around and I walked away. Again, done. This isn't about an intellectual conversation. So the messenger woke up. Then in Israel, I made friends with this one woman who lived in a town called Ojai, California. Now I'm living in Pennsylvania. I don't even know anything about Ojai, how magical it is, or that I'm going to live there or anything. And I after that day of that experience I had, everyone was just looking at me from a distance. Like it was like no one wanted to talk to me, but everyone was curious. It was
Yes.
really weird,
Yes.
you know, because I also didn't know what happened. Well, Deb, I felt really comfortable with. And I was saying to her at a certain moment, I said to her, we were in this parking lot and I looked at her and we were right near the Sea of Galilee. And I said, I just wish I had a brother who I just wish I had a brother who I could talk to. I just wish I had a brother who I can talk to and would be a supportive force in my life. And she went, oh, hold that thought. I'm sorry. And she went, Direction over my head. A friend of hers from Ojai was crossing paths in Israel on another journey with shamans as we're on this walking the footsteps of Christ. So she walks over to talk to him and she introduces him to me. And it's like he became my best friend like that. He had this butterfly necklace on. There was this big metal butterfly. And we went to dinner that night. He joined us. And I was telling him, I love your necklace. I love it. And as he's eating, the necklace falls off. And he literally pulls it out of his lap and he goes, this must be for you. And boy, I was going through a metamorphosis. So when you ask me what happened after I gave notice, I end up reading a book called Soul Something, Soul Cravings or Soul Something. And I think I want to meet this. I want to meet the author. I would read books and just feel like I need to meet the author. My girlfriend's like, oh, I know her. And she calls Anne and puts me on the phone. Anne says, Anne says, I'm being called. You need to come here. You need healing. I'm like, I don't have the money. I can't. Before you know it, I'm on a plane to Point Roberts. I'd never known that place ever. I go to Point Roberts. Once I go there, we go to these talks. And at these talks, she's doing a bunch of things and then says, you should hear about this thing. And we go to this talk and this woman's drinking this drink and it's really purple. And I keep thinking, I got to ask her what that is. And I walk over to her and I said, what is that drink you're drinking? She just ends up loving me. She's like, you should move here. I'm never thinking of moving to Washington State. You should move here. You know, my husband and I have this land and you'd love this, blah, blah, blah. And she like plants this seed, tells me about what the drink is. And I'm on my way. And I do a bunch of healing sessions with this woman, super intense. She makes me write all these letters to my ex-husband. She makes me do more healing, does all these essential oils, brings all this magic into my life. And then I'm supposed to be there for 2 more days. That guy I meet in Israel ends up just randomly calling me. And he's like, hey, what are you up to? And I said, oh, I'm in Point Roberts. I'm going to doing these healings. And he goes, I want to gift you a trip to Ojai. You're on the West Coast. Why don't you come here before you fly home? I'm like, okay. So I decide so I tell Anne, she goes, you've done so much great work. Really, the next day, I just want to take you to another talk. But yeah, if you want to leave early, sure. I go. She drives me to the Vancouver airport where I end up meeting a man on a bus who ends up helping me move.
Wow.
2 months later, from across the country to California, who ends up being a man in my book and ends up being someone I have a relationship with and is the reason I end up going from California, which I thought I was moving to Washington State to be close to him. But in the meantime, when I meet him on the bus, which is a 2-hour, because the flights end up getting overbooked and they can't get me on a flight and I have to go to Seattle. So I'm on the bus for 2 hours with him, 2.5 hours to get to Seattle. And we make this amazing connection. I get to California and I get to Ojai. This guy I meet in Israel who was like, him and I became such close friends. He slept outside my door. I pull up to his house in this, and he's in a mansion the size of a hotel. This is a guy that slept on the ground. So I'm like, what's going on? He ends up being incredibly wealthy and extremely humble. And so I'm like, this can't be his house. The doors are like bigger than a small house, the door. And so I spend time in Ojai, and while I'm there, just all of these magical things happen. I just can't even tell you. I stayed there for 3 days. I make an offer on a house. It gets accepted. I think I'm moving to Ojai. I get home. I put an offer on the house that I had been renting when I was married, and I get an offer on that right away. So I'm now going to move to Ojai, California. Things changed in that 30 to 60 days, even that, but my move was already in motion. So what the house I'm about to move into that ends up being a crack in the foundation, and I have to pull out, but my house is already being sold. And guess what? Now I have no place to move my stuff. So
Okay, I love that. So I think you need to just hold that thought.
Sorry.
Okay, sorry to interrupt, but I need to hold that thought because this is beautiful. All the synchronicities, I can just see the synchronicities and how you get the house that you can't move into being left like in the cold. Now, where am I going to go? So we are going to have a second part to this because, right, this is a perfect place to stop because don't you want to know what's going to happen next? And don't you want to know about how a woman actually feels and how to treat a woman or how to actually get over your shame, body shame, sexuality, sensuality, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
So hold that thought and watch this space for our next episode with Andrea Elliot. So what do you think about that, Andrea?
That's great. That's wonderful. I know my story's kind of the serendipity gets on steroids. So thank you for your this interview, and thank you to everyone out there who's on their journey. And myhigherkingdom.com is my website too. If you need support in your life, and I can see that right here, you're going to get a lot of support from this woman as well, who's a coach as well. So thank you for having me, and I look forward to coming back.
Yes, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Andrea. So, hold that thought because the next one's going to be even better than this one already was. So, thank you, everybody, and thank you so much, Andrea. I can't wait for your next episode because I can't wait for all the little details and we've heard and all the little things that we've learned just on this one. So, listen carefully, and you know what? Listen to it again. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Andrea, and we'll see you soon.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.